Let me make sure that the people within the sound of our voices tonight understand this. For the first time in the history of the Modern-Day Budget Act, the Senate has not even brought forward a budget plan to be debated, much less amended and voted on by the elected representatives of the people. Is that correct?
That's correct. Mr. President, I believe there's a little...
Senate will come to order. Please proceed.
And this is astonishing in light of what the Senator has pointed out with regard to where we're going on payment of interest on the national debt. Anytime we're paying interest, that's money that can't be used for highways, for infrastructure, for if someone wanted to try a stimulus to small businesses by cutting their taxes. That's money that's not available to us for that purpose. I just wonder if the Senator would like to talk about his particular plan, a bipartisan plan, that at least attacks the exponential growth that we've had in discretionary spending. I think the Senator has a plan with the Senator from Missouri that would attack this issue at the discretionary level, virtually freeze domestic discretionary spending, and at least for that small part of the budget, give us some relief. Is that correct?
That is correct, Senator Wicker, and I thank you for mentioning that. Senator Claire McCaskill, my Democratic colleague from Missouri, and I have offered legislation that would essentially take the budget that was submitted last year, and it had a 5-year numbers, and the first year numbers were not very good. I'll show you some of the spending increases last year in our baseline accounts and how much increases they got. I know my colleagues will find this hard to believe because it's so stunning, but the State Department and Foreign Operations got a 32% increase in baseline spending last year. The Interior Department, including EPA, which got a 35% increase, Environmental Protection Agency, totaled a 16% increase. Commerce, Justice, State, that's the Commerce Department and Justice Department, 12.3%. Treasury HUD numbers, 23%. Agriculture, 14.5%. Defense, 4.1%. So we've been spending rapidly. But the budget called for less spending this year and next year and the next year. It was a 5-year budget. So what we did, we asked our colleagues, let's on a bipartisan basis pass legislation very similar to what was passed in the early 1990s that really was a critical act in achieving a balanced budget in the late 1990s. And this action would say that if you went above that spending level, which is basically projected to be 1% or so, that it would take a 2/3 vote of the Congress. And this would help us maintain spending, don't you think, Senator Wicker, if we had a 2/3 vote?
If the Senator would continue to yield, I think it would certainly be a start. I dare say if Senator Sessions and I were the sole deciders on this issue, we might find a way to cut spending even further. But on a bipartisan basis, we ought to at least be able to say, Mr. President, let's bring to the floor for discussion a proposal that would virtually freeze domestic discretionary spending for 1 year. I would commend to my colleagues, Mr. President, a letter dated July of this year from every Republican on the Senate Appropriations Committee, pointing out, number one, the enormity of the federal debt and the problem and direct threat that it proposes to national security, the need for a long-term plan, the fact that the committee is compelled outside of a budget because we didn't even get a chance to debate one, to come up with a top-line number, pointing out the Sessions-McCaskill legislation that would virtually, essentially freezes non-defense spending. And importantly, every Republican on the Appropriations Committee said, we're committed to that number. I think as the American people begin to look at us, particularly as we move toward this crucial vote on November 2nd, it's important for Americans to understand that Republican appropriators have made that commitment and made it in writing as long ago as July of this year.
Well, I think that is important to note, and I would further note that every single Republican supported the McCaskill-Sessions amendment, but also 18 Democrats supported that. And I believe if we had the leadership just say yes instead of no, it would pass easily, and would be a healthy thing because it would send a message to the financial markets worldwide that, well, we at least have some fiscal discipline. It'd be very unlikely that spending would go above this level if we have a two-thirds supermajority point of order to object to spending over that level. And I would note that the amendment is supported by a number of bipartisan groups, including the Concord Coalition, the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, the National Taxpayers Union, the Heritage Foundation, former Congressional Budget Office and OMB Director Alice Rivlin, and she served under President Clinton, and former CBO Director Douglas Holtz-Aiken. So this is a bipartisan piece of legislation that would bring us to a point that I believe we can say to the world, we are going to stand by the numbers that the President gave us last year, not Republican numbers, but the President's numbers. Now remember, the baseline budget's increases are already there. And so I think what we are really going to have to do, Mr. President, is when we really get a budget and get some new leadership and get us committed after maybe this election, we get a spanking by the American people, we need to have a budget numbers based on the 2008 spending levels. It will not bankrupt us. The country is not going to sink into the ocean. But if we went back to 2008 levels, 2007 levels, and then had some modest increases each year from there based on inflation rate, we would see an even larger improvement in our financial situation and be more competitive.
One more time.
Yes.
I know we're limited, and at the top of the hour, some other people are scheduled. I think this is very important. We were spending an enormous sum of money in fiscal year 2008. I do believe that in this crisis that we have, we can get back to that level and make do. And that is so important in light of what this Congress and this administration have done to the national debt in 3 short fiscal years. Last year, this government added $1.4 trillion to the national debt. That's $1.4 trillion that we spent here in Washington that we didn't have. This year, it will be almost that much, $1.34 trillion. And if things don't change, the national deficit, which will add to the debt,
time has expired.
Next fiscal year will be $1.24 trillion. It's a crisis. We need to address it, and this legislation is a start.
I thank the chair and yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Vermont.
Thank you, Mr. President.